How much did Gonzaga's win over St. Mary's help them in the eyes of the bracketology experts? Well, maybe not as much as we would have hoped.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by TurboTax. Folks, if you're ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back, head over to TurboTax.com today to get matched with an expert. Well, the season is over for Gonzaga until Selection Sunday as we wait to figure out where the Zags are going to get seated. We're going to talk more about their resume in the second segment, dig into some details. We'll talk NET and KenPom and that, but we'll also talk wins above bubble, strength of schedule, some other stuff that the committee is going to evaluate. We're going to close out the show talking about the Pac-12, not the current Pac-12 of just Oregon State and Washington State, but the conference Gonzaga will be joining. Looks like between 3 to 5 teams from that conference will be in the NCAA tournament this year. We'll talk about that to close out the show. We're going to start with the bracketology experts. What have they said? Because when we recorded the post-game episode after Gonzaga beat St. Mary's on Tuesday night to win the WCC tournament and cement a spot in the NCAA tournament, we hadn't seen any updates from the bracketologists. And for the most part, kind of coming into that game, most of the people who we follow who do bracketology kind of had Gonzaga in that 8 seed, 9 seed range without a ton of wiggle room. Occasionally you'd see a 7 seed, occasionally you'd see a 10 seed, but for the most part, they were pretty entrenched in that really not fun place to be in that 8-9, where your second round matchup, if you win the first game, ends up going against the number 1 seed. But we haven't seen, not everybody's updated. Some folks are waiting till the end of conference tournaments to get a big final update with the amount of games going on a day-by-day basis. Every power conference has at least 4 games going on Wednesday afternoon as I'm recording this. So we haven't seen a ton of bracketologists make major sweeping updates, but the ones that have, a lot of them didn't move Gonzaga as much as I probably thought that they would, and I think as much as many others maybe thought that they would. And it's worth a couple of caveats. One, again, I think some people are just going to make bigger sweeping changes to their brackets after they wait a day or two and kind of let the dust settle with some of these first round matchups in the power conferences. Some folks maybe just aren't a big believer that Gonzaga's win over St. Mary's moves the needle all that much. Maybe some folks are, who knows? There's a lot of different things that it could be in this situation. But I do want to look at a few of the brackets, ones that we regularly cite on this show: Joe Lunardi at ESPN, Jerry Palm at CBS, Mike DeCourcy at Fox Sports, Lucas Harkins at Heat Check College Basketball are a few that I wanted to take a look at. Our friend, former guest of the podcast, Rocco Miller, the bracketeer, did not update he has not updated his bracket since Gonzaga's win over St. Mary's. I'm very curious to see what he has to say about Gonzaga, though, after talking to him last week. But since there's no update as of this recording, we don't have him included here. But the only place where we really saw significant movement, we saw 2 places that moved Gonzaga out of that 8-9 seed line and into the 7 seed range. First was Joe Lunardi. And while Lunardi's not the most accurate bracketologist, in fact, historically, he tends to rank in the middle of the pack when you look at bracketmatrix.com, a phenomenal resource that at this time has collected 88 different brackets from various media outlets and sources and averages them all together and kind of gives you a composite look at the bracketology reports. And at the end, when the actual bracket comes out, they kind of collect all the data and say who was the most accurate, who was the closest, who was the farthest away, etc. Lunardi's typically in the middle, but he is the most kind of well-known source in this space. So when he moves Gonzaga up, I think that helps just from a awareness, from a brand recognition perspective, things of that nature. And Lunardi had Gonzaga floating around that 8-9 seed line for the last couple of weeks. He moved them into a 7 seed in Lexington, playing a 10 seed in Drake, the Bulldogs out of the Missouri Valley Conference. Drake, a team with a new head coach, Ben McCollum. a roster full of players who followed McCollum from the D2 level to the D1. A lot of people weren't sure how Drake was going to do with the new coach. In the Missouri Valley, they were phenomenal 30-game winners this year, automatic qualifiers in the Missouri Valley. It would be a really fun, really intense matchup. It actually is fairly similar to Gonzaga's matchup last year when they were a 5 seed and they drew a 30-win mid-major team in 12-seed McNeese. This obviously is a little bit different. Missouri Valley is a more kind of respected conference than the Southland, but certainly a similar type deal for Gonzaga. And this is, again, one of 2 brackets we saw where Gonzaga climbed off of that 8-9 seed line and into the 2 seed or into the 7 seed conversation, where you would play a 2 seed in the second round as opposed to playing a 1 seed. Now, there are basically 6 teams that are all vying for 1 seeds right now. Auburn and Duke have them pretty well locked up. You have Houston in the Big 12, and then you have 3 other teams in the SEC in Alabama, Florida, and who's the last one here? Alabama, Florida, and Tennessee, all vying for one of those last 1 seeds. So if you get a 2 seed or if you get a 7 seed and you're playing one of those teams on the 2 line, I don't know if it's that much better than playing one of the 1 seeds. And in this specific case, Lunardi would have Gonzaga, if they were to advance past Drake, he has them playing the 2 seed being Alabama. Those games are in Lexington, Kentucky. Not a great draw for Gonzaga to be a 7 seed going up against a 2 seed Alabama in Lexington, but I suppose a 7 seed is better than an 8-9 seed. Lunardi still has St. Mary's as a 6 seed. One of the things I noticed is that not a lot of people moved St. Mary's down after their loss to Gonzaga. I think that's fair. I understand that, but I do wonder if the actual committee, when the time comes, will value that loss a little bit differently, perhaps than some of the bracketologists who are just making updates to this thing on a day-by-day basis. Jerry Palm still pretty low on Gonzaga. He was he had them as a 10 seed after they beat Santa Clara last week, which I thought was kind of odd. He's moved them now up from a 10 seed to a 9 seed. I guess better. It's good that they're moving up, but they're still in the 9 seed conversation, according to Palm at CBS, taking on an 8 seed Creighton team, also in Lexington, with the 1 seed being Auburn. This is a brutal draw, an absolutely brutal draw. If Gonzaga finds a way to get by Creighton, they would have to take on the number 1 overall seed in the Auburn Tigers, the best team in college basketball. A brutal draw, because I don't even know if Gonzaga gets by Creighton. Ryan Kalkbrenner is one of the best bigs in the entire country. He's a 2-way player, 3-time Big East Defensive Player of the Year, high-level scorer. He can space the floor, but he's also elite around the rim, great shot blocker. He's a matchup nightmare for Gonzaga. I hate a draw where you're a 9 seed facing an 8 seed Creighton, with Auburn being the team waiting for you in the round of 32. That is a brutal, brutal draw. And Jerry Palm might just be a WCC hater. He's got St. Mary's on the 8-9 line, and he kind of always has. He's had Gonzaga. He's one of the only people I've seen who hasn't had St. Mary's above a 7 or above an 8 in the 7-6 seed conversation. A lot of places have St. Mary's as a 5 seed, and yet Jerry Palm has them as an 8 seed, has Gonzaga as a 9 seed. I think he's just not somebody who's a big believer in the 2 West Coast Conference schools, certainly not at this point. Mike DeCourcy at Fox has continued to keep Gonzaga in the 8 seed conversation. That remains the case here. 8 seed against a 9 seeded Vanderbilt team. This came out before Vanderbilt lost to Texas in the second round of the SEC tournament. So I think Vanderbilt's probably going to be closer to that 10 seed, maybe even 11 seed conversation. For Gonzaga, 8 seed is, again, fairly consistent. This is also in Lexington. This is also with the second round game being against Auburn. Brutal stuff. DeCourcy, at least, bigger believer in St. Mary's. He has them as a 5 seed. He didn't move them off the 5 line despite the loss to Gonzaga. Again, feels like that win didn't move the needle for a lot of folks who do this bracketology stuff on a day-by-day basis. Lucas Harkins, though, at Heat Check College Basketball, former guest of the Locked On Zags podcast as well. He did move Gonzaga up. He had them pretty consistently in the 8-9 seed line conversation previously. He's moved them up to a 7 seed. Also in Lexington, apparently, if you need to book a flight and you're just guessing, maybe not a bad idea to book that flight to Kentucky. He has them as a 7 seed taking on a 10 seed Baylor. This would be unusual. It's not unprecedented, but it would be unusual for teams that played each other in the regular season to face off in the first round of the NCAA tournament. The rules stipulate that they try to avoid this. It is not a rule that you cannot do this, from my understanding, but it is unusual. Now, Gonzaga, we know, is kind of in the conversation with, in a similar seeding conversation with teams like UConn and Baylor and potentially San Diego State if Gonzaga were to jump to the 6 seed line, or if San Diego State were to get to a 10 seed. So it's possible that this does happen. This is the most favorable draw Gonzaga could get out of the brackets that we're talking about on the show, because they have a 7 seed Yes, it's in Lexington, but they're taking on Baylor, a team they've already played this year, a team they've already beat this year. And their 2 seed is Michigan State. And there's no disrespect to Michigan State whatsoever. Very good team. The idea that playing Tom Izzo in March is the best scenario for Gonzaga is kind of shocking because nobody wants to face Tom Izzo in March. But I think Gonzaga matches up decently well with this Michigan State team. It's a better matchup for them than Alabama or Florida or Tennessee would be. I think just from a physicality perspective and a size perspective, I think Gonzaga is better matched up against Michigan State. So I think this would be a fairly ideal scenario for them. Harkins continues to have St. Mary's on the 5 seed line as well. Those are the brackets we're talking about for right now. We'll have more conversation on this on Friday as we see some more brackets come out. I mentioned Bracket Matrix earlier. I'm going to talk about them more in the final segment of the show when we look at the Pac-12 teams. But just for those of you who haven't checked it out, website's Bracket Matrix, 88 brackets on there right now. The Zags are between a 6 seed and a 9 seed in every single one of them. There's not a single bracket out there that has Gonzaga 10 or lower. There's not a single bracket out there that has them 5 or higher. And I think that's justified. I think that's where Gonzaga is going to land. I tend to be in the camp, and you can call me a homer if you want. It's a Zags podcast, where I think they're going to be 6, 7. I think 7 feels like kind of the reasonable. I think 6 is fairly unlikely, although not as unlikely as maybe some folks think it is. I would be very shocked if they finish below a 9. I think 7's most likely, 8 and 6 kind of right behind it, in my opinion, at this point. And obviously, with lots of basketball still to be played, that will impact how this bracket shakes out on Selection Sunday. But let's talk about the resume. We're going to talk about the computer metrics, which we've talked about quite a bit this season, but we're going to talk about a few other metrics that are going to be used by the committee as well, and what could change between now and Sunday, including some teams we're going to be rooting hard for over the next couple of days. That and more coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go? Because between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's pretty easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you can just stop managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. My wife and I always want to make sure that we are on the same page when it comes to finances, and thankfully with Monarch Money, managing money with your partner is smoother than it's ever been. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. Folks, are you looking to optimize your nutrition this year? Factor makes eating well easy with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved meals that are fresh, never frozen, and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. With 40 options across 8 dietary preferences every single week, you can customize your meals to fit your lifestyle, whether it's calorie smart, protein plus, or keto. Plus, Factor even offers wholesome smoothies, breakfast, and grab-and-go snacks to keep you fueled all day long. I personally love how Factor takes the stress straight out of meal planning, and without sacrificing taste, these meals are packed with flavor. The convenience is unbeatable. No prep, no mess, just great food in minutes. So eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/LockedOnCollege50 off and use code LockedOnCollege50 off to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we are still talking about Gonzaga's NCAA Tournament resume as we are just a few days away from Selection Sunday with that big, beautiful bracket finally coming out, and an opportunity to know where Gonzaga is going to play, who they're going to play, what their path to continuing their Sweet 16 streak looks like, and how possible it might be to see the Zags team go on a significant run from a lower seed, something that we've seen all too often in the Mark Few era. What might that look like? We're going to talk specifically about Gonzaga's resume right now. We're going to talk about their net record, things of that nature, kind of what the season, now that it is complete until the NCAA tournament, kind of the full scope of what this has looked like. Gonzaga finished the season with a 25-8 record. Their wins over teams that are projected in the NCAA tournament include St. Mary's, of course, their most recent win, Baylor, their oldest win, their first win of the season, San Diego State, which also came way back in November, and Indiana, which also came back in November. Now, 3 of these 4 teams are on the bubble. Baylor, I think, is probably, I'll tell you right now, I'm recording this show. Baylor's playing Kansas State. As I'm recording this, by the time you're listening, this game is probably over. It's about halftime. Baylor's up big. So hopefully that maintains. They're up 17 points right now in the final seconds of the first half. So they win this game. Even if they lose their next game, they're probably they're in the field. They're going to make it. San Diego State, they got some work to do. We'll talk about them in the final segment. Indiana, they're playing Oregon on Thursday morning. As I'm recording this, again, that game hasn't happened. Really rooting hard for Indiana in that game. But all those teams are projected right now to be in the field. Teams that Gonzaga lost to that are not in the NCAA tournament field, Santa Clara and Oregon State, of course, those back-to-back losses in the middle of conference play. The worst week for Gonzaga this year. If that week hadn't happened, we'd be having very different conversations about this team at this point. They still didn't pick up the marquee wins they needed in the non-conference, but without those two really gutting conference losses, I think this conversation would be much different. Worth acknowledging that earlier in the day today on Wednesday, West Virginia lost to Colorado in the second round of the Big 12 tournament. They're still projected to be in. And most places, I think, are still going to keep West Virginia in. But if the bubble shifts, if there's some bid thieves potentially, West Virginia could be a team that suddenly finds themselves in trouble. So that's another one to keep an eye on. Gonzaga's net ranking has continued to be in the top 10. And as of now, with their season done, they are 8th in the net. 4-6 record in quad 1 games, 6-2 record in quad 2 games, 5-0 in quad 3, 10-0 in quad 4. As I said, I'm recording this at halftime of the game between Baylor and Kansas State, with Baylor up 17 points. They're likely going to win this game. If they win this game and they win it big, that is going to potentially help Gonzaga in a major way. Baylor is currently on Wednesday 33rd in the net. They need to be top 30 for Gonzaga's win against this team from way back in early November to be a quad 1 win. If Baylor beats Kansas State, they have a good chance to climb, maybe not all the way to 30, but then they play Texas Tech on Thursday. I don't expect Baylor to beat Texas Tech. They could. They're capable of beating Texas Tech. But it's worth pointing out that Baylor could, if Baylor beats Kansas State by 17, if they maintain that lead or beat them by 20 plus and then lose a close game to Texas Tech, that may be enough for the Bears to climb to 30. That might be enough to do it. If you beat Texas Tech, you're very likely 30th or higher for the Baylor Bears. Indiana, as we said, faces Oregon on Thursday. Currently, Indiana's 52nd in the net because that was a neutral site game. If Indiana's in the top 50, that becomes a quad 1 win. If Indiana beats Oregon, I believe they will climb 2 spots and be 50th. All this to say, Gonzaga's currently 4-6 in quad 1. They could be 6-6 without doing anything differently. That could reasonably happen. They could be 5-6. If Baylor doesn't quite get there, but Indiana pulls the upset and beats Oregon, that could get the Zags to 5-6 in that spot. That's a big deal. It seems so silly that a game Gonzaga won back in November could help their resume between now and Selection Sunday, but that's how it goes. The computers aren't going to value it that much. The computers are not treating every, like the difference between the one of the worst quad 1 teams and one of the best quad 2 teams is not going to make a big difference to like the overall ranking in like the net or KenPom or things like that. But the humans who are looking at this, the difference between seeing Gonzaga being 4-6 in quad 1 and 6-6 is a pretty big deal. Whether it should be or not is a different question for a different time, but it is. It is. I think there's just no way to look at, the immediate kind of glance at Gonzaga's resume. The difference between being 500 in quad 1 games and being below 500 in quad 1 games is fairly significant. There's nothing Gonzaga can do at this point. They cannot control the outcome of this Kansas State-Baylor game or of tomorrow's Indiana-Oregon game. But if those teams win, it could help their resume look a lot cleaner on Selection Sunday when that committee sits down to put this whole thing together. As we said, net is 8th for Gonzaga. KenPom, they're 10th. They're ahead of so many very good teams. They're ahead of Kentucky, Purdue, St. John's, Arizona, Texas A&M, Clemson, BYU. Every one of those teams is projected to get a top 4 seed in March. Every single one of them. Maybe Clemson's on the 5 seed line, but basically all those teams are 3-4 seeds. St. John's might sneak into the 2 seed. Gonzaga's ahead of them at KenPom. Does that mean they should have the same seed? Of course not. That's not the argument I'm saying. I'm just saying there's a reason that some of these 2 seeds might be shaking their boots a little bit if Gonzaga's on that 7 line. Bart Torvik has Gonzaga 9th. So the net has them 8th. Torvik has them 9th. KenPom has them 10th. Again, for those of you who've been listening as regular everyday listeners, you've heard me say this, but I bring this data up not just because it makes Gonzaga look good, but because it is on the sheets. The committee gets team sheets that they are supposed to use to evaluate the NCAA tournament field of 68. These are data points that are on there. So I'm not just saying that because they make Gonzaga look good, but because they are valuable data points that committee will use. So too is wins above bubble. And this isn't one we've talked about as much. It's through Bart Torvik's website. Effectively, it is how many wins you have compared to what they project as a bubble team. Again, the name is pretty self-explanatory. Wins above bubble. It's kind of like WAR for those of you who are baseball fans. Wins above replacement. So the example they give is if you went 14-2, and Torvik's projections say a bubble team would go 11-5, your wins above bubble would be 3 plus 3. And obviously a team that's worse than that would have a negative wins above bubble. Gonzaga's wins above bubble is 2.9. So just about that example there, basically just about 3 wins above the bubble. That's 31st in the country. So 31st is not bad. But again, when the other computer models have Gonzaga 8th, 9th, 10th, wins above bubble carries a lot of weight in the committee's eyes and certainly does not view Gonzaga as that high of a team. It views them as a good team, a team that is better than a bubble team, clearly, but not dramatically better. But they are ahead of Creighton. They are ahead of Missouri, who's projected in that 7-6 seed conversation. They're ahead of Utah State, UConn, West Virginia, Vanderbilt, Baylor, San Diego State, etc. Most of those teams are projected in the 9, 10, 11 seed range. So, of course, Gonzaga is higher than them. The only teams in there that are kind of projected higher than Gonzaga is Missouri, in some places Creighton. But they're behind teams that are kind of in that same conversation as well. They're behind Ole Miss. They're behind Kansas, who's mostly projected as a 6 seed. They're behind New Mexico, who a lot of places have 8-9. Mississippi State kind of in that 8-9 conversation as well. So wins above bubble is an important stat to keep an eye on for Gonzaga as well. And then strength of schedule, 72nd for Gonzaga. That's pretty bad. And it's unfortunate because a lot of this is not Gonzaga's fault. The WCC will always drag down Gonzaga's strength of schedule. We know that. That's part of the reason they're making the move. But Gonzaga has played a very competitive non-conference schedule that didn't ultimately end up being as good in terms of the quality of opponents that Gonzaga expected it to be. We have Baylor to thank for that. We have UConn to thank for that. We have UCLA to thank for that. The list goes on and on. Indiana, another team that wasn't great this year. San Diego State, not great this year. Like, these teams are fine. Most of these teams, all of those teams, I believe, are going to make the NCAA tournament. Indiana, San Diego State being the bubble teams. But even teams like West Virginia and Arizona State didn't do as well going into conference play as they looked in the non-conference, which has kind of hurt Gonzaga. Again, it's not like we can really blame them. Gonzaga needed to win some of those games, and they didn't do that. That is on Gonzaga for not winning those basketball games. You can't blame anybody for losing to Oregon State and Santa Clara except yourself. But it is unfortunate that Gonzaga's strength of schedule metric is not favoring them when they worked so hard to put together an incredibly competitive non-conference slate. They are ahead of other mid-major teams, as you would expect. The only kind of high major bubbly team that I saw Gonzaga ahead of was SMU, who's kind of on the wrong side of the bubble now. They're ahead of St. Mary's. They're ahead of New Mexico. They're ahead of the other Pac-12 Mountain West teams like Boise State, Utah State, Colorado State. They're ahead of Dayton. But for the most part, they're behind everybody else that's in that 6-7 seed conversation. And I do think that will drag them down a little bit when it comes to how the selection committee views Gonzaga's resume and what they do with them ultimately for Selection Sunday. Well, folks, we talked about how we're going to talk about the new Pac-12. So we're going to get into it. It's going to look a lot different in 26-27. Obviously, in the transfer portal NIL era, rosters are completely overhauled in a year or two. So what is happening this season is not necessarily indicative of what the Pac-12 is going to look like in the future, but it gives us a nice jumping off point. There's 8 future teams in the Pac-12. Looks like between 3 and 5 of them are going to be dancing this year. We got more coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, taxes used to be waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only on iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, folks, segment 3, still Eddie Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, closing out the show, taking a look with a few days until Selection Sunday at how the new Pac-12 looks in terms of how many seeds they're going to get in this year's NCAA tournament. Obviously, those units are going to go to the WCC in Gonzaga's case. They're going to go to the Mountain West in the case of the other teams in this conference who are projected to make the field of 68. But it's nice jumping off point in terms of where this conference is at right now as we get ready for not next season, but the season after that, when Gonzaga will ultimately join this new look Pac-12. So what it is, I went to bracketmatrix.com. I've mentioned them a few times on the show. Again, 88 total brackets there. And I've compiled, they average out the seeds. They show you the highest seed, the lowest seed for all the projections. And then I'm going to give you kind of what is next for these teams. The Mountain West Conference tournament is still going on. Two of these teams actually playing each other on Thursday. So we'll get an update on kind of what is next for these teams, what it looks like for them going forward. We'll start with Gonzaga. 88 brackets. They're in all of them, of course, as they now have cemented a spot in the field with their win over St. Mary's on Tuesday. Their average seed is 7.6. So in that 7-8 seed conversation, the highest that we saw them in the bracket matrix is 6th. The lowest was 9th. They don't have any games coming up. They are done. They are waiting it out to see what happens with the rest of the field, specifically what happens with Baylor and Indiana, some of those other teams in that 7-8 seed conversation. Next highest is Utah State, the Aggies. 9.8 is the average. They are in all 88 brackets as well. The highest we see Utah State is 9th. Nobody has them higher than 9th. The lowest anybody has them is 11th. So they are again, all 88 bracketologists at Bracket Matrix have Utah State in the field. Every one of them has them either as a 9, a 10, or an 11. Very in lockstep with what to deal with this Utah State team. They're playing Thursday at 8:30 p.m. Pacific time on the CBS Sports Network. As I'm recording this right now, we do not know who they are going to play. They will play somebody in the Mountain West. They are the 3 seed in the conference, so they should draw a fairly decent matchup and opportunity to boost their resume just a little bit more before we get into the big dance. Next up, San Diego State. Average for them is 10.7. Now, while we have talked about them as a potential bubble team, the bracketologists, 87 of the 88 have San Diego State in the field. So there's a lot of confidence amongst the folks making these brackets that San Diego State will be in the field when the bracket is revealed on Sunday afternoon. The highest anybody has the Aztecs is 9th. The lowest, obviously, is out. Outside of that, it's 12th, which makes sense. You're not going to have San Diego State as a 13 seed. So they are a 12 seed, 10 seed, 12 seed, 11, 10, or 9, with one person saying, hey, they're not going to make the field. And they got an opportunity to cement their status in the field of 68, in my opinion, at least, when they take on Boise State on Thursday. This game is at 2:30 Pacific time on CBS Sports Network. Very fun game. Highly recommend watching it on Thursday if you have the opportunity. It has some impact on Gonzaga from a Boise State or from a San Diego State perspective in terms of wanting to have another team that we beat this year that makes the field. It has an impact for Leon Rice, the former Gonzaga assistant coach, who's the head coach at Boise State. It has an impact because these are both going to be teams that are in the Pac-12 next year or 2 years from now when Gonzaga's in it. So a game well worth checking out. And then for Boise State, they're on the wrong side of the bubble. This is a huge game for them. If they beat San Diego State is probably then like squarely 50-50 in terms of whether they're going to make the field or not. Whereas Boise State, who right now most folks do not have in, they would be in a much better position. This is a 4 versus 5 matchup in the Mountain West Conference tournament field, by the way. Boise State, they are averaging 11.3, but they're only in on 6 of 88 brackets. 82 of the 88 bracketologists do not have Boise State in the field right now. The highest anybody has Boise State is 11th. That's it. All 6 of the brackets that have Boise State in the field have them 11th. Again, 82 of them have them out right now, but they got a huge chance to pick up a major game against San Diego State on Thursday, again, 2:30 Pacific time on the CBS Sports Network. Next up is Colorado State, who actually finished second in the Mountain West Conference again. Boise State, San Diego State are both considered bubble teams, and that's the 4 versus 5 matchup in the Mountain West Conference. Utah State is in every single bracketologist field, and they finished 3rd in the conference. Colorado State finished 2nd, yet they are only in on 1 of these 88 brackets. Their non-conference wasn't as strong, and they came on really strong late in the year. I think they won 7 in a row to finish second in the Mountain West Conference. This conference is just, they beat the heck out of each other every single year. It's what makes it so fun with Gonzaga joining that mix in a couple of years. Colorado State was a 12 seed in one bracket. They were out in the other 87 brackets. They, again, we also don't know who they're going to play on Thursday, but if they win that game, a big opportunity for them to potentially play for a Mountain West Conference championship. If they can get there, get themselves an opportunity against New Mexico, or if Utah State gets there, whoever ends up making it, Colorado State is probably only a win or two away from flipping the script and potentially being on the right side of the bubble. But for right now, according to the majority of bracketologists, this is not a team that's on the right side of the bubble just yet. Washington State, Oregon State, Fresno State, the other three teams in the Pac-12 starting in 26-27, none of them projected to make the NCAA tournament. None of them will. Like there's no reality where any of those teams go dancing. It's not in the cards for any of them, but that means that somewhere between 3 to 5 of the 8 teams that are currently in the Pac-12 starting in 2026 are going to go dancing. Gonzaga's been in a conference historically that never gets 3 teams. They got 3 teams once a few years ago when San Francisco had a tremendous season. But for the most part, this is not something that happens for Gonzaga. The idea that 5 of the teams in Gonzaga's conference could go dancing is tremendous. This is what we want. This is what we're excited about with Gonzaga joining the Pac-12. There's also some other targets for the Pac-12 that we know of. We haven't talked extensively about St. Mary's pursuit from the Pac-12. It's been brought up a handful of times. I've written about it a few times for those of you who read the written work at athlon.com. But we know that the Gales have reached out to the Pac-12. We know there's been some dialogue. We know there's been some concern about their facilities, et cetera, et cetera. But there's no debate about the men's basketball program and the success that they are having. Right now, St. Mary's average, according to Bracket Matrix, is a 5.7. They are on all 88 brackets. The highest anybody has them is a 5. The lowest anybody has them is an 8. Nobody has St. Mary's lower than an 8 seed. They're in the top half of the bracket for every single bracketologist who filled out a bracket at bracketmatrix.com. Of course, they don't have any more games remaining. And then I'll mention Memphis here. Obviously, there's other teams that have been rumored for the new Pac-12: UNLV, Texas State, Sacramento State, Wichita State, UT San Antonio, North Texas, Central Florida, et cetera, et cetera. None of those teams are going to make the field. Of the teams that often get rumored to join the Pac-12, Memphis is the only one that is going to make the field. All 88 bracketologists agree. They average out as a 7.5. The highest anybody has Memphis is a 5. The lowest anybody has Memphis is a 9. Their next game will be Friday the 14th in the American Athletic Conference semifinals. We do not know their opponent. This game will be at 10 a.m. Pacific time on ESPN2, though, if you want to check out Penny Hardaway and his Memphis club. Worth having some eggs in the morning for those of you on the West Coast and watching a little Memphis American Athletic Conference basketball. I'll also just mention New Mexico. They're the team that finished first in the Mountain West. They're not really a strong target for the Pac-12 at this time. The brand, the media market, the football, everything about New Mexico doesn't really appeal to the Pac-12, with the exception of men's basketball, which is unfortunate because Gonzaga would probably love to have New Mexico, but I can understand why the rest of the Pac-12 doesn't. But they would be a pretty fun addition to the rest of this mix for the Zags. All right, folks, that's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. We'll be back on Friday. More bracketology as we get ready for the NCAA tournament picture to come into focus. We'll got some more fun stuff for you to close out the week as well. But folks, want to thank you all for listening. Remind you to hit that subscribe button on YouTube if you have not done so yet. Follow the written work at athlon.com. Join the Discord channel. There's a link in the show notes as well if you want to check that out. And of course, as always, for the rest of your day, go Zags.